I was 35 when the sky split over me like glass, the world spinning into a scream I never heard. The day had begun with ink and signatures, $11 million in neat serif letters, my uncle's name curving like a final blessing, and I drove home rehearsing how I'd tell my husband a watch box on his palm, his tired eyes softening our long winter of worry, finally thawing. I can still see the wet sheen on the highway, the silver belly of a trailer tilting the watch tumbling out of its velvet nest, as if time itself were trying to escape. Then a white roar, a bright punch to the chest, silence blooming in petals of black. When I woke, the room floated on antiseptic light, beeping a small, stubborn song. I tasted metal and regret. My leg was a cage, my ribs a cracked piano. "You're lucky," the doctor said. I thought of the truck driver who wasn't. I thought of the watch. I thought of Eric, how he would rush in and kiss my hair, how his hands would tremble at the words I had saved for him. He didn't come. On the fourth day, my phone buzzed with the first thing he had said to me since bone met metal. "Heard about accident. Really busy with breakthrough project. Will visit when things calm down." I read it once, twice, as if meaning could be coaxed from dryness. I remembered the early years when he painted until dawn, and I sold headlines for other people's miracles. I remembered choosing the steady job so our rent would never panic us. We used to split slices of cheap pizza and pretend the cardboard was a plate from some gallery gala where we belonged. That night in the hospital, the nurse named Sarah tucked my blanket and told me to rest. I turned my face to the wall and let a quiet, ugly grief unbutton me from the inside. I kept telling myself that shock makes people stupid, that he was scared and helpless without me. But then Melanie, who doesn't know how to lie unless she's protecting someone, stood at the foot of my bed with supermarket flowers and eyes that skittered like minnows. "He thought you died," she said, and the words laid themselves over the room like a sheet. "He told people. He held something like a memorial. He changed the locks." The monitors tattled on my heart as it broke in neat electronic spikes. "Show me," I said, and she did his arm around a young woman at a gallery, their champagne catching chandelier light. The caption, "New Beginnings." I stared at the photo until it blurred, then sharpened. And what unsettled me wasn't just the betrayal, but the echo, a face that looked like mine if youth had wiped away the years I'd survived. I didn't say this aloud. I swallowed it like a pin. When the lawyer read my uncle's letter to me, "Money is a tool, not a solution," I tucked each sentence away like a stitch. I had loved the old man too late. He'd seen through the polished glass of the life I kept and admired the girl I'd been before I dimmed myself down to fit. He left me enough to forgive the world its hunger. But money is just a mirror. It shows you what you are. In the reflection, my husband was already practicing an expression that wasn't love. I wanted to believe that grief had smudged my logic, that bruises were blooming on the part of my mind that knows how to be sensible. Instead, truths arrived in a careful procession. Eric at the estate attorney's office presenting papers that said I had gone where my uncle had, asking about how to honor my wishes. A whisper about a courthouse ceremony. Screenshots of him in the suit I had once promised him he'd buy, with his first big sale now sprinting ahead of our marriage like it had won a race without me. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's a snowpack shifting from within a series of soft, cruel sounds beneath what looks like serenity. Then, the avalanche. I asked Sarah for a small camera. She didn't ask why, only adjusted my pillows and pressed my hand in a way that said she had seen whole lives shatter and rearrange under hospital light. My therapist, with kind eyes that did not flinch at the ugliness in mine, told me to breathe like a woman giving birth to a creature called anger. "You hold the power," she said, "even while you feel powerless. Let the truth walk in. Don't let it bulldoze you. Make it sit down." I thought of the watch again, how I had bought it because I believed in time as a promise. Now time felt like a witness. When Eric finally came, he had trimmed his beard into a sharper lie and wore a watch I had not given him. He performed concern like a man auditioning for a role he didn't understand. Darling, he said, placing papers on my tray table as if they were flowers you shouldn't be worrying about finances. Behind him, half hidden in the doorway, stood the woman from the photos, her mouth an apology that never made it to sound. I waited for his eyes to soften. They did not. He talked about signatures. He said we like a man who had rented out my pronouns. You told them I died, I said gently, like a nurse asking a child where it hurts. He flinched, then smiled the smile I used to think was art. Misunderstandings, he said. This is about your recovery. It was then that the young woman stepped forward, and the room tilted toward her as if pulled by a tide. She looked at me the way people look at portraits of themselves from another century. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Your eyes." In the thinnest part of me, something old and unburied sat up. Time the watch, the echo of a face. I felt the hospital bed holding me like a shore, and for the first time since the road lifted and the sky broke, I understood that this was not only a story about money or marriage. It was a story that had started long before the crash, with a secret I had wrapped in silence so tight, it had left marks. The young woman's face was pale as she stared at me, her lips trembling with a recognition she couldn't contain. Her voice cracked in the still air of the hospital room. You look exactly like my mother." Eric spun toward her, anger lashing in his eyes, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped closer, her gaze fixed on mine. In that moment, I saw it too. Her cheekbones, the slope of her jaw, even the small scar above her brow. They were all pieces of me copied like brushstrokes from a painting. I felt my lungs seize as the truth clawed its way to the surface. She wasn't just some replacement for me. She was blood. I remembered the night I had given birth alone, young, terrified, and told that the baby hadn't survived. I remembered the cruel efficiency of paperwork signed under morphine haze, the hospital's silence, my mother's cold reassurance that it's better this way. That grief had haunted me for years, a wound I had learned to fold inside myself. And now here she was, flesh and breathing, standing in the same room as me. My daughter. The one I had mourned, stolen from my arms before I even had the chance to name her. My body trembled, but my voice came out steady like glass about to shatter. "Who told you your mother was gone?" Her eyes filled with water as she pointed at Eric. "He said you died. That's what he always told me." The floor of my world gave way again, but this time it wasn't weakness that swallowed me. It was rage, thick, molten, unrelenting. My husband, the man who vowed to protect me, had not only betrayed me in marriage, but had stolen my very blood to fashion a new life. His new wife was not a stranger. She was my daughter. Eric tried to cut through the moment with smooth words, but his voice wavered. "It's complicated. She needed a family. You couldn't." He didn't finish because I laughed. Not the laughter of joy, but the kind that shakes loose every mask you've ever worn. "You buried me alive," I whispered, "and you used my daughter to cover the grave." The next weeks blurred into a storm of discoveries. Melanie helped me trace the adoption records, the forged death certificates, the money that had quietly changed hands. My uncle had suspected something years ago. That was why he left me everything. Why he wrote those words about tools and solutions. He had wanted me to have the power to face this day. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was armor. I began to walk again, each step a rebellion against the cage my husband had tried to weld around me. With every movement, my daughter's eyes followed me, torn between confusion and hope. She had grown up under Eric's lies, believing him to be a savior. Now she saw the cracks. Slowly, she let me tell her about the girl I was, the life I'd lived before she was ripped from me, the love I had carried like a secret flame all these years. She wept, but she listened. Eric, however, didn't stop. He tightened his grip on the narrative, throwing money at lawyers, parading himself as the man betrayed by an unstable wife who had imagined conspiracies. He underestimated me. He always had. I wasn't just a broken woman crawling back from a crash. I was a mother reclaiming her child. I was an heir wielding power he couldn't corrupt. I was a truth he could never bury again. The confrontation came one evening in the grand living room of the house he had once called ours. Chandeliers glowed above as his guests whispered over champagne. He was charming them with the same smile he had once used to woo me, the same one that now looked like a mask peeling at the edges. I walked in on a cane, my daughter at my side, and the room gasped. It was the sound of ghosts returning. Eric's face drained of color, his lips forming my name like it was a curse. I raised my head and let the silence sharpen into a blade. "You told the world I was dead," I said, my voice carrying through the hall. "But here I stand with the life you stole." The murmurs exploded into chaos, and for the first time Eric had no script to hide behind. The chandelier light caught my daughter's tears as she took my hand. In that moment, I felt the years of grief harden into something unbreakable. This wasn't just my story anymore. It was ours. Eric's mask cracked that night, but his arrogance didn't die easily. He lunged into excuses, documents, witnesses, fabricated stories of my instability. The crowd of elites, once enchanted by his charisma, now recoiled, as though they had glimpsed the rot beneath his skin. My daughter, standing beside me, tightened her grip on my hand. Her trembling revealed her fear, but her eyes blazed with a fury. I recognized my fury inherited like the shape of her face. The days that followed were war. Courtrooms became arenas where lies and truths wrestled for dominance. Eric fought with every weapon he had, lawyers sharpened into blades, journalists fed half-truths like candy, and crocodile tears shed for the cameras. But I had something stronger. I had evidence: my uncle's letters, the forged certificates, the testimonies of those who had helped bury my motherhood under a mound of deception. And I had her, my daughter, brave enough to testify that she had been raised in shadows of lies, told a false story of a dead mother, while her real one breathed just beyond reach. Still, betrayal has a way of clawing at your ribs, even as you fight back. At night, alone in my bed, I'd curl into myself, haunted by the years I'd lost. I'd whisper the name I had once chosen for her, a name Eric had erased from existence, and wonder if it would ever feel right to say it aloud again. Rage kept me moving, but grief gnawed quietly at my bones. Revenge was not enough to stitch back what had been torn. One morning, as sunlight spilled across the courthouse steps, Melanie slipped her arm through mine and said, "You're not just fighting him, you're teaching her that truth survives." That sentence landed in me like a stone settling into place. Yes, my daughter needed to see that no matter how carefully lies are woven, they can unravel under the weight of persistence. She needed to see her mother stand tall, even with scars, and limp, even with a heart that sometimes shook. The climax came when Eric cornered and, desperate, tried to flip the narrative one final time. He stormed into the courtroom with papers he claimed proved my unfitness, painting me as a delusional woman, unworthy of trust. But when the judge asked my daughter to speak, silence fell heavy as stone. She rose, hands trembling, and looked straight into Eric's face. "You told me my mother was dead," she said, her voice breaking but clear. "But you lied. She's alive, and she's been alive all along. You stole her from me. You stole me from her." The courtroom air shifted like a tide breaking. Eric's lips parted, but no words came. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, and for the first time it wasn't just me fighting him, it was the truth itself, standing in the form of my child, undeniable and fierce. When the ruling came, Eric's empire of lies collapsed. Assets frozen, reputation shattered, his smile gone. He walked out of the courthouse, a hollow man stripped of the stage he had built on the bones of my pain. I didn't feel triumphant, not exactly. Revenge wasn't sweet, it was heavy like ash in my mouth. But it was necessary. Justice had been carved out of agony, and it stood now trembling but alive beside me. Afterward, we sat together, my daughter and I, in a quiet cafe, away from cameras and whispers. She stirred her tea without drinking, her eyes swollen from tears shed on the stand. "I don't know who I am anymore," she whispered. I reached across the table, covering her hand with mine. "You're mine," I said. "You always have been, even when the world tried to erase it. You are the piece of me I thought I lost forever. We'll find the rest together." And for the first time in decades, I felt the weight of grief loosen just enough to breathe. Healing was not swift, nor was it simple. After the verdict, the world expected me to emerge victorious, smiling in the glow of justice. But the truth was quieter, messier. Nights stretched long with the ache of years I would never reclaim. Birthdays, missed lullabies, unsung teenage heartbreaks I hadn't been there to soothe. My daughter sat across from me at dinner tables, her eyes searching mine as though she could find all that time tucked away in my face. Sometimes she would flinch when I reached for her hand, and I would retreat into silence, afraid to scare her with the enormity of my love. We began slowly. Walks in the park, conversations about nothing, books, movies, the trivial threads of everyday life. At first we were strangers, bound by blood, fumbling toward familiarity. But then small things emerged, uncanny echoes of me and her, the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, the stubborn crease of her brow when she disagreed, even the way she laughed, sudden and unrestrained. Those fragments stitched something fragile but real between us. Eric tried once more to claw his way back into relevance, leaking stories to the press that painted him as a misunderstood man who had only wanted to provide for a child. But his voice no longer carried the same spell. People had seen the cracks, and the empire of charm he had built was rubble. I didn't need to strike back anymore. The silence of the world around him was punishment enough. Karma had a way of turning even the sharpest knives against their wielder. One evening, my daughter and I visited my uncle's estate, the house where his will had been read, the place that had set this entire storm into motion. We walked through the echoing halls, past shelves lined with books and portraits of ancestors whose secrets still haunted us. She paused before one painting, a woman with my same dark eyes holding a child in her arms. "She looks like you," she whispered. I nodded. "And she looks like you." It was then she finally asked, haltingly, if she could hear the name I had chosen for her at birth. My throat tightened, but I spoke it, letting the syllables roll into the quiet air like a prayer finally freed. She cried, and so did I, and in that shared grief, something was reborn. Revenge had carried me through the fire, but it was love that waited on the other side. Not the kind of love that blinds as it had with Eric, but the kind that survives even when buried beneath lies and years. I realized then that my uncle's gift wasn't the money. It was the chance to build a future from the ruins, to wield my scars as proof that survival can bloom into something stronger. As months passed, my daughter moved in with me. At night, we sat together by the window, drinking tea and sharing pieces of ourselves, stitching a tapestry from threads that had almost been lost. I still limped from the crash, my body a map of pain, but every step felt lighter with her beside me. We laughed sometimes, real laughter, and each time it startled me, like finding light in a house long abandoned. And though my story was scarred with betrayal and loss, I knew it carried a lesson deeper than vengeance. It was about truth, how it claws its way to the surface, no matter how deeply buried. It was about love, how it survives even when twisted, stolen, denied. And it was about endurance, the kind that allows a woman broken by fire and deceit to rise not just for herself, but for the child she thought she'd lost. So here I am telling you this story, not for pity, not even for triumph, but as a reminder. Lies may wound us, betrayal may bury us, but truth and love can still find their way back through the rubble. If you've ever been broken, if you've ever thought your story ended in darkness, know this. Sometimes the ending you fear is only the beginning of a truth you were meant to discover. If my story touched you, please like, share, and subscribe, and leave a comment to tell me your thoughts. Your voice matters, your story matters, and maybe together we can remind the world that even in betrayal, even in loss, there can be light.